is that, with the leader gone, that people would treat them differently. And that's kind of where we stopped. So it says also in verse 36, let he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. A garment was an important piece of clothing, according to two different commentaries mentioned it was used for protection, used for cover. So it wasn't just like a throwaway piece of clothing. Like, it was a big deal to have sold your garment to get a sword. And, he says, buy a sword. Is this contradictory to any other instruction, i.e., turn the other cheek? Anything like that? Do when we're talking about Jesus telling him to get a sword, before we didn't have to have a sword. I mean, obviously it's not contradictory, but what's the difference? Why is it important they have a sword now?
There's a lot of discussion amongst the brethren about the necessity of personal protection versus as opposed to what you mentioned in regards to scriptures. Allow your enemies to take advantage of you to the point that you're willing to turn the other cheek.
Okay.
At the very least, the Savior is not condemning personal protection here. There's two different words for sword in the text.
Right.
This one is a personal protection device. It is not the executioner's sword, the sword that would be used perhaps to behead people or in heavy combat. But it is still nonetheless a personal protection device. The Savior, I think, is telling us that when the situation is such that your own personal well-being is at risk, then you do what's necessary to protect yourself. And so from a condemnation of us having devices, if you will, that are for our own well-being, I don't think he's condemning it. I don't know that this is definitely an authorization of purchase.
Right.
But certainly he does not condemn them taking care of themselves and having what is necessary for their own physical protection under difficult times.
Right. So Mark is saying this is a reference for them to have personal protection of their own. There's two different words for sword in the Greek, and there is one implies like an actual sword that you would find in war, and then another one is more like a dagger, if you will. And they even mention it's like for killing game, foliage, like getting foliage out of the way, things like that. So this is more of a reference to that type of thing. So again, it's not contradictory at all. It's more of a, you're going to have to take care of yourself. It's very likely people are going to be out to get you at this point, right? Verse 37 says, "For I say to you that this which is written must still be accomplished in me, and he was numbered with the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end." So this is a direct reference to Isaiah 53, verse 12. And it says, "Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great. He shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death. He was numbered with the transgressors. He bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors." So often, I mean, Jesus calls back to the book of the law constantly, and there's so many different prophecies that are fulfilled in the New Testament, and this is just another one about things that were written coming to pass. Verse 38. It says, they said, "Lord, look, here are two swords." And he said to them, "It is enough." So I think this kind of puts to rest the idea that they're getting armed for a battle. They have two between 11 people, right? So it really comes back to what Mark was saying. It's more about personal protection and just, being armed to some extent. Yes, sir.
You have that contrast between verse 35 and 36. In 35 he says, "Remember the first time I sent you out, I told you don't need to take anything, and I took care of you, didn't I?"
Right.
And they acknowledge, yeah, he took care of you. He's not saying, "I'm not going to take care of you now." He's saying the stakes are going to be higher.
Right.
They're about to kill him. It's about to become a more serious endeavor, and he wants them to understand that the level is greater now.
Right.
The risk is greater, and the danger is greater. Everything is at a higher level now.
And they have some responsibility to take care of themselves, right? And that still holds true today, right? God is always watching over us, and God ultimately will take care of us, but there's things we have to do for ourselves as well. Any questions or comments about verses 35 through 38? Just wanted to finish that up from last week.
That last sentence in 37, "For the things concerning me have an end."
Mm-hmm. Right.
that has ever been spoken in the law or in the prophets or in the wisdom literature concerning him, it's all going to be fulfilled. And it's a very powerful statement because of the context that it's in. We kind of have a tendency, I think, sometimes to gloss over that last sentence of that verse.
Yeah.
But this is one of those very powerful verses that's everything.
Right.
It's been prophetically uttered about me, and it's going to come to fruition.
Right. So Mark is calling the last sentence out of verse 37 that says, "For the things concerning me have an end," and it's about completion, right? I mean, it's and I think it's Mark and John. It both says all these things happen so the scriptures may be fulfilled. It's the same principle. Like all these things that are going on. I mean, down to the minute detail, are exactly what's supposed to be happening for us to be where we are today. So it is one of those good verses to kind of put things in perspective for sure.
There's an amazing principle here for me with here's the Son of God that knows how he's going to die, literally that he is hours away from death, what is going to happen to him in the hours that transpire between his death and when he's made other in his work. And he's telling his closest companions, I need you to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
No thought on his own, of his own, and I don't think I can do that.
Right.
I mean,
Well, we're not built that way.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd be more concerned with Mark than I would be
Yeah.
my companions.
Right. Mark is calling out how amazing it is that Jesus, knowing he's a few hours away from his death, his concern is the people that he's with and not his own well-being, which again, that's the whole point of his being here in the first place. But and you think about how many times Jesus could have gotten out of this. I mean, one of the versions says he could call 10,000 angels. And of course he could, right? But he knew why he was here, and he knew he had a job to do, and so his primary concern was the ones he was leaving behind, which we're thankful for, obviously. All right, verses 39 through 46. We'll read those real fast. Coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives as he was accustomed, and his disciples also followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Then he said to them, "Why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation." So here we have Jesus' prayer in the garden. Of course, every gospel has an account of this. I think verse 39 is interesting. It says he went to Mount Olives as he was accustomed. And if you look at John 18, verse 2, Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often had met there with his disciples. So Judas knew where he was going to be, and because this is a place they had been before. This is a place that they knew. So it's important in the text that he was accustomed to it. It's a place where he's going to be. So that's how Judas was. It was so easy for him to find him. Verse 40, when pray that you may not enter into temptation. Of course, he knew that they were going to fall asleep. I mean, he knows everything, and of course he could have prevented. It's just worth mentioning everything that happened from the betrayal, every little thing from when he entered Jerusalem up to the point of his crucifixion. At any time he could have stopped it. He could have prevented it, but he knew the perfect plan and what his part of it was. Verse 41 says, he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw. He knelt down and prayed. I think here it's interesting. In Mark's version says he fell on the ground, and Matthew says he fell on his face. Either way, he knelt, he fell down on the ground. It's obviously a sign of respect. It's a sign of maybe emotional exhaustion at this point. At the end of the day, he was human while he was here on earth and knew what he was going to go through. Which leads us up to verse 42. But either way, it was a sign of respect and submission, if you will. Verse 42. If it's your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. to me, this is just extreme emotion, coming out. Jesus was human on earth. He was afraid, possibly, knew he might enter into temptation later on, but never lost sight of why he was here and what must be done. And when it says this cup, let's see, I wrote down Psalm 11:6. Upon the wicked he will rain coals, fire and brimstone, and a burning wind shall be the portion of their cup. So a cup is essentially what awaits someone, right? In this case, we know that the cup represents what awaits him at the cross. So this is something that's used before. It's used again in Isaiah 51:17 and about another one's cup, what they have in store for them. Verse 43, I think, is such an interesting verse. An angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. Why would Jesus need an angel to appear to him for strength? Right.
That's their job.
Right.
That's a hard one for us to kind of sort out because we're not sure how that works for us. But what you see throughout the text is that angelic beings have always been those that either one directly combat evil, or two, they go to the assistance of those that are faithful to God.
Right.
And so this is standard operating procedure, if you will,
For an angel. Right, so Hebrews 1:14, talking about angels, says, "Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation?" So what Mark's saying is that this is basically standard operating procedure for what an angel's job is. In this case, of course, it's just a big job because of who they're ministering to, but ultimately that's what they're here for. And I think it's just important. Jesus was a man here on earth, and so he could have been tempted. And ultimately, God loves him and sends an angel to comfort him, right? But there's a lot of reasons, and there's you talk to people who all the time are like, well, why would Jesus need this? Well, why does God need our prayers? It's not about the need. When you pray to God, it's not because God needs your prayers. It's because we are commanded to do so, and we need them. We need to pray to God. God does not need our prayers to exist. God is there. He's always going to be there. So it's not necessarily that Jesus needed this, but what a great thing to have, right? Mark said maybe it's the answering to the prayer that was just uttered, which I mean, exactly. Right? If he prayed, if this is your will, take this cup away from me. If not, let your not my will but yours be done. And then an angel appeared to him. So it's very likely a direct answer to what he just said. Verse 44, being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. His sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. So, agonia, the word, means anxiety, which, that's such a buzzword these days because everyone's anxious about something. But and then agon, I guess agon, means a struggle or a fight. Both of these things apply here, right? He very likely was anxious about what was going to go on, and he was always in a struggle or a fight here on earth, spiritually. And so I thought that was interesting that word, you think agony, you just think pain, but it's a little bit deeper than that. Sweat became like great drops of blood. Do we think this is literal blood at this point? It's possible, Mark said. Of course it's possible. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's one of the two, regardless.
Yeah.
Under severe emotional stress or physical stress, you can literally sweat.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely possible. The word that kind of throws me off there is that if there's English teachers in the audience, it became like great drops of blood. So it's kind of a simile. So who knows? Either way, the point is, it was pretty serious what was going on. So we don't want to get caught up in the minutia of that. Verses 43 and 44. I have a side note here. Verses 43 and 44 are omitted from several early manuscripts because they thought they're left out because it opposes Jesus' divine nature. So for him to have shown any anxiety or fear or weakness, I think that's interesting. That to me, that's some of the most important verses for us. I mean, it's very relatable for us as humans. Yes.
It may be that he knew we would struggle with the God and man concept.
That,
That's part of the reason why he referred to himself as the Son of Man.
right.
Over again.
Right.
He wants us to understand that on earth he was also a man, just like we.
Yeah, and I think that's right. Todd said it's possible that he knew we would struggle with the whole God-man at the same time, which a lot of people do. A lot of people struggle with that still. So I just found it interesting that of all the verses to leave out, and they look at it as a weakness thing, when in fact, to me, it just makes it more humanizing and apropos for what you and I would think about what was happening during this time. He found disciples sleep in verse 45. He found the disciples sleeping from sorrow, which I thought was an interesting thing. Maybe they're stressed out. There's been a lot going on. Maybe they're depressed. We think they maybe they're starting to understand what's going on. We don't think there's not super clarity, I think, of to the extent of him what going away really means for him at this point. But have y'all ever been so depressed that you fall asleep? I mean, it's a bad word, depressed, but we all get in a bad mood sometimes or sad, and that happens. I mean, people a lot of times that's how your body deals with it. You fall asleep. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah, Paula said sleeping would be an escape, and that's exactly right. That to me, it's almost like I can't handle it anymore, and my body shuts off, because it knows it needs to. So I just thought that was interesting. In Mark's account, verse 46, he says, "Why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter temptation." In Mark's account, he actually finds them sleeping 3 times. I'll just go over Mark 26 real fast. Excuse me, Matthew 26. Let's see. He went a little farther. This is Matthew's account. Apologies. He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Oh, Father, if it is possible, if this cup pass from me, nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "What? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, a second time he went away and prayed, saying, "Oh, Father, if this cup cannot pass from me unless I drink it, your will be done." He came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were so heavy. He left them, went away again, and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting?" So I just think it's interesting. The point is, we need to know that they were falling into temptation in the version of, he told them to stay awake, watch and pray, and they just weren't able to. Any comments or questions about verses 39 through 46?
Always found it interesting, reading verse 41, he withdrew from his sleep. This is just Peter, James, and John.
Right.
It's closest of the 12 is with him. And the withdrawn business, in some ways, one reflects the model prayer. You go into your closet,
Right.
call some private time with the Heavenly Father. But there may be an aspect of this he realizes that other men can't help him.
Yeah.
That there comes a point in our life where that's the case. Our fellow man cannot do what we
Yeah, so Mark was saying, verse 41, he finds it interesting that he withdrew from these three disciples, and it could be a combination that he wanted the privacy. I mean, knowing what he was about to pray, it's very likely he wanted privacy for what he was about to ask. But what Mark was saying is that it's also come to a point where he knows that his fellow man cannot help him, that it's really between him and God at this point, which it was, for sure. Any other comments? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that he acknowledges the difficulty of the situation, but he doesn't tell me it's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
He says, no, you have to do this. And
Yeah.
their response is, well, we can't. He says, no, you have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder if it's like that with us sometimes. God looks at us and says, no, you can't. You just need to get something. You just need to work harder. Because he not once says, well, it's a big deal, so you ought to just relax.
Right. Yeah. So Todd's saying that in Matthew's account, three times he comes out and catches them, and does not cut them any slack for falling asleep, which is true. I think it's so important. Verse 41 of Matthew 26, it says, "The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." I mean, is that not true for a ton of things that we as Christians go through? But it means we can. It absolutely means we can. The flesh is weak. That's an absolute fact. We all fall into temptation at some point. Hopefully our spirit is always willing, and we talked about it last week. How do you come back from it? If you make those mistakes and you give in to temptation, what's the plan now? What do we do now? What's next? But that verse is such a good verse in Matthew. Yeah.
You made the cup reference. You'll see in Revelation the cup of wrath.
Yep.
He's already told James and John, one of them's going to sit on your right hand.
Right.
Are you able to drink the cup?
Right.
I'm about to drink. And so the cup reference is metonymically the contents of either the wrath or the judgment to come, or whatever circumstance.
Right. Yeah. The cup reference. There were several I didn't write down, but it's referenced several times about what the cup means in situations like this. So, okay, so we'll move on to verses 47 through 53. Let's see here. While he was still speaking, behold, a multitude, and he who was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When those around him saw what was going to happen, they said to him, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus answered and said, "Permit even this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, captains of the temple, and the elders who had come to him, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you daily in the temple, you did not try to seize me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness." Again, a lot going on. There's so much in this chapter. So verse 47, a multitude, but it specifically, of course, names Judas and says one of the 12. And I just think that, we talked about this last week, but Judas was one of his closest disciples. He was one of the 12 people that chose to do what he chose to do. And it's just, it's baffling to us in hindsight that anyone could have done this. But they call him out specifically. It says a multitude. John 18:3 says a detachment of troops, and depending on the source, it's somewhere between 300 to 600 men that he brought. Like, I just had never really thought about that before. I just always thought it was a few guys. But I mean, they came well heeled. There was 12 of them, but because of the situation and because of who it was, I guess they just wanted to show a force or wanted to make sure it went down like they thought it was going to go down. Who knows? But that's a lot of people to arrest one person. So, verse 48, he says, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" And the first thing I thought of was in Proverbs. Proverbs is my favorite book. But Proverbs 27, verse 6 says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." That's the first thing I thought of when I read this. And, up to this point, we would have considered Judas his friend. Judas would have called himself his friend up to that point, but indeed, it was an enemy. A kiss is universally considered a sign of love and affection, right? So it's interesting that was the method of betrayal. This sign of love and affection, in fact, was condemning the Lord at this point. Verse 49, those around him saw what was happening and said, "Lord, shall we strike with a sword?" And, this is interesting after he had just had this conversation about needing a sword, right? He had just had this conversation, but clearly this was not the intent of those swords. There was 300 to 600 troops, depending on history accounts. But the point is, there's 11 of them, and we know they have 2 swords. So, that's definitely not what he meant before when he's talking about getting a sword. So it kind of all comes to fruition here. But I think it's interesting, between 49 and 50, they ask, "Shall we strike with the sword?" No answer, but one of them struck with the sword, right? We never have Jesus saying anything before it happens. One of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. Of course, we know from John 18, this is Peter who struck Malchus, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus said, "Permit even this." So back to Matthew 26. Matthew 26, verses 52 through 54. This is right after the same account here. Jesus said to him, "Put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot pray to my Father right now, and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? How then could the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must happen thus?" So kind of back to what we were talking about earlier. Number one, verse 52, all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Very profound statement, obviously. And again, he could have called 12 legions of angels, but we know in 54 all the scriptures must be fulfilled. That's the whole point of all these things happening. So, I find it interesting. Jesus healed Malchus, healed his ear. Why is this significant? Why is that such an important thing to have happened? Okay, Mark says it's the last recorded miracle we have aside from the resurrection. That's true.
Well, that's not entirely true. Tearing of the veil in the temple and some other things like that.
Yeah.
As far as him actually
Right, performing one. Yeah.
And I've always found it ironic that people that have come out to arrest him and kill him now witness a guy getting his ear cut off
Mm-hmm.
and it being miraculously healed.
Right.
Nobody says,
It.
"Oh, wait a minute."
No one says anything.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it may be John's account, and I may be wrong with this, but when he's confronted and they ask and they identify him, and when he comes forward, he doesn't hide. He steps forward when
Right.
he's approached, and the whole bunch basically falls down.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
it's an interesting situation. Surely there was somebody in the crowd
Right.
that goes, "Now wait a minute, I just saw this guy's ear cut off, and he fixed it.
Right.
Are we arresting the right guy?"
Right. Yeah, how can they not respond to something like this? How can you see an ear get cut off and someone touch it and heal it and them do nothing? Yes, sir.
Same way we do nothing.
Yeah. Right.
We see a lot more than that.
Yeah.
We get to read about and witness your testimony a lot more than that. And then we say,
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that.
And that's true. Todd says we ignore a lot more than that sometimes, and I completely agree. But to see it happen in person, there's just a different to me. And maybe it's just me in my mind. I'm like, man, how do you see that and not go, whoa, wait, hang on. But something I thought of, and maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but we have Peter who took action against the servant of the high priest. Very easily, he could have been arrested, but if they had arrested or accused him of doing that, and here's this guy that's healed, then they'd have to admit what happened, why his ear's back, right? Well, they cut his ear off, but, well, no, it's right there. Well, here's the thing. I mean, to me, it's more profound than just he healed his ear. It was protecting Peter, and to me, it's just another example of they were bound and determined for this to happen regardless of anything that happened around them. Yeah.
One other thing it says is he's still in charge of the process.
Yeah.
They kind of think they are.
Right.
But he makes it clear that he.
Yeah. Todd says it makes it clear that he's still in charge of the process, and that you would have to think, besides the awe factor, you'd have to think there's some fear happening. Like, what else can he do? He just reached out and healed this guy's ear. Like, they even outnumbered 600 to 12. You'd have to think that maybe we don't have enough people. It's an incredible thing for that to have happened, obviously. Verse 52, Jesus said to the chief priests, captains of the temples, the elders, Mark also mentions scribes in his account, but here we've been talking about these people a lot. The priests, the elders, the scribes, the religious leaders of the time are completely involved in this. And it's just so odd that this all happened, but he would have disrupted their power. They like their position, they like their places in the temple and all those things. So, and have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? I think that's an interesting comment as well. Like, I'm not a thief, I'm not a robber. I've done nothing. There is no sin in me. But you're coming to me in the dark of night with 600 people, 300 to 600 people. And in verse 53, to me, this is just Jesus calling them out. When I was with you daily in the temple, you did not try to seize me, but this is your hour in the power of darkness. He's basically saying you could have done this any time. I was not hard to find. I was in the temple teaching and preaching. Why didn't you do it then, right? And we know why they didn't do it then. But that last verse, this is your hour in the power of darkness. You can read a lot. There's a lot of commentaries about that. Basically, he's saying this is Satan's hour, and it's the power of darkness, that type of thing. So it's a very condemning statement to these guys, and he's just calling them on it. And I think that's just awesome that he would do that, right here in front of everybody. And he's right. And we all know that, what is it? My mom used to say, nothing good happens after 10 p.m. or something like that. It got later as I got older, but the point was, things that happen at that time of night usually aren't on the up and up. And I think that still holds true a lot of times, doesn't it? So just everything about this is shady. They knew what they were going to do. Nothing was going to deter them from doing it. They were convinced that they were doing the right thing. And so regardless of the miracle, regardless of them being convicted of anything, they're going to go through. Yes, ma'am? That's true. Right. 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 And how often does that still happen? I mean, we're not seeing these miracles happen, but if here today, if there's something we want to do and we want to do it bad enough, probably nothing's going to stop us. Any warnings, any red flags, any repercussions that might happen after the fact, we don't think about those right then because this is what we want to do. So I think that's a good call to say this is what they wanted to do as opposed to they were convinced it was right. So good comment. Any other questions or comments about 47 through 53?
Well, John 7, some of these things, religious authorities had sent temple guards to arrest him.
Right.
And they come back and say, nobody does what this guy does. We're not arresting him.
Right.
And so it's interesting that now we've come full circle. I mean, in talking about Malchus and the denial of the miracle, they've already conspired to kill Lazarus.
Right.
He raised him from the dead. Well, let's get rid of the evidence.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. They were going to do what they wanted to do. Thank you, guys. Thank you.